Hello, everybody, and welcome again to the 42 Courses podcast. Thank you very much for turning on and listening to us today. We're delighted that you have joined us. And today I am very excited to be joined by Alison Kosik. Alison, you might not recognize her, but in the US, if you're joining us from the US, you may well recognize Alison. Alison is a long-term CNN anchor and now with ABC. And she's also the author of this super new book, What's Up with Women and Money. I absolutely love that cover, Alison. You're
Thank
very
you.
welcome to the 42 Courses podcast.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be with you today.
So, Alison, I'm going to explain to the readers now that I first came across your work literally browsing on the publishers. So it's Harriman House again, published by Harriman House, browsing on the website there, just seeing what they were having published recently, came across this book, thought, God, that looks really interesting. And you've sort of had a front row seat, really, to the world of finance and news for years. What inspired you to write this book, and why now, Alison?
Well, actually, my own story inspired me to write this book. And as you said, I was CNN's business correspondent for more than 15 years. Oftentimes, I was reporting for the New York Stock Exchange. But the irony is, in my own life, I wasn't managing my own financial life. I let my husband do all things financial. It really wound up being one of the biggest mistakes of my life because when the marriage went bad, because I let him do all the financial things, I felt stuck. I had, two kids under the age of 10. What if I made a mistake? What if I made a wrong decision and lost all of our money? So I wound up staying in the marriage years longer than I should have. And this is because of not necessarily not having the knowledge. Obviously, I had the knowledge. I didn't have the confidence in applying that knowledge simply because I hadn't been actively making those big financial decisions over the years. And I think confidence really has a huge part of that ability to make those big financial decisions. It's just like we're not really taught it. We're not taught this stuff in school. And we have to sort of learn this on the go. And if you're not doing it actively, it doesn't really give you much confidence. And so when I cleared this chapter of my life, I realized that there are a lot of women who feel the way I felt. And it's something we don't talk about. It's embarrassing. I was really embarrassed. CNN's business correspondent, not managing her own financial life. What? So yeah, that's embarrassing. It's not something that I was readily going to admit. And I talked to a lot of women and they also felt and feel the same embarrassment and shame. And there's a concern about being perceived as unintelligent. And it's not that we're incapable, it's just that we're not confident. And so I realized there are a lot of women out there who can relate to what I was going through. And so I wanted to help other women not make the same mistakes I made. So I went ahead and wrote this book.
Well, that's very open and honest of you, Alison. I mean, obviously, we're sorry to hear about the personal circumstances, but as it turned out, to yourself, there were many things about that situation that became beneficial. And you, as you said, you've spoken with a lot of women. Were there particular patterns or themes that surprised you when you spoke with the women, or was it very much experiences like yourself?
I realize that the reality is that even the most informed women aren't the most empowered. And so I noticed this phenomenon across all socioeconomic, across the socioeconomic scale, meaning high earners, low earners, married, single, widowed, divorced, just a lot of women just not involved in their finances, letting somebody else handle it because it's easier, because you think that he or the partner knows more than you do, or just avoiding it altogether. I did lots of interviews in the book because I wanted to illustrate stories more so like cautionary tales to inspire women who are reading the book to get involved. One that comes to mind is a woman in the venture capital space. What's venture capital? She's in charge of raising money for companies. But when I spoke to her, she was in tears and I was crying with her on the phone as I interviewed her. She was so regretful and just beside herself. She was in her 50s. She didn't even know what an IRA was until she reached maybe 50. She didn't even start investing. She had $100,000 in her savings account. And she described her ability to manage money as something that wasn't sort of in her domain, something she didn't feel confident doing or comfortable with. And this is a woman who was really, really good at her job. And in fact, great. She's anonymous in the book, but it really shows that, we can thrive at our roles at work, but we won't necessarily see that translate into our personal wealth. And that's an interesting phenomenon right there as well. Another woman I interviewed, who used to be in the software space. I did write a chapter about estate planning, and she also was crying to me on the phone, talking to me about how her husband was diagnosed with colon cancer 2 years before, giving with a 2-year runway. They didn't make a will, they didn't make a trust or anything like that. She didn't check the beneficiaries, and it wasn't until a Friday, almost 2 years later, where they decided to get the will done, and they called the lawyer, and the lawyer said, "I'll have the papers ready for you on Monday." And he died on a Sunday, I believe it was, and so they never got the paper signed. And so I asked her, "You knew 2 years that he had colon cancer. Why didn't you get your things together?" And her answer was, "I don't know." And it's not that she's stupid. We're not dumb.
Mm.
I think it's an overwhelming feeling to start tackling something that doesn't come easy for you, or that's complicated or seemingly complicated or is upsetting to start digging into. No one really wants to talk about death. But the sad part about this is, obviously she lost her husband. She has 2 young kids at the time. She wasn't working at the time, so she had to somehow get back into her career. Um, and she was certainly regretful about that she didn't keep her toe in the water, because, and that's another piece of advice I give women is, even if you're taken care of by your husband, you have lots of money, great. My advice, always keep your toe in the water of your career, just a little bit. Keep it going. You never know what can happen. Life can be blissfully happy one minute and then change on a dime. Going back to her story very quickly, the other issues were the beneficiaries. She assumed that the beneficiaries were who they should be. Unfortunately, he left a lot of the investment money to his brother, unbeknownst to her, and she doesn't have a relationship with the brother. It's an acrimonious relationship. So guess who gets the money in that case? The brother. He wasn't willing to turn over the money. Also, she had pushed him to get life insurance, and he did, and it's something that he was really excited about. And she was actually complimentary when he got the life insurance. Problem is, she didn't look into it. It wasn't enough life insurance, so she really was in a pickle after he died, despite having a 2-year runway. So these are just 2 examples of really smart women who weren't fully involved in their financial pictures, who offer cautionary tales to all of us who read this book, that we really need to get involved now, that there is an urgency to get involved now.
You write in the book about how you feel that financial advice isn't written for women. Can you explain that a little bit, what you meant by that?
There are a lot of sports themes used, game time, there's the bull on Wall Street. I know, working at the stock exchange, it feels like a locker room. It's mostly men. There's just a lot of male themes, and there's also the cultural aspect of it, that women grow up believing that men are better at math, or men are better with money than women, and so that's what I meant.
Okay, and it seems like from the stories, um, women have come so far, but it seems like the juggle possibly of, you've childcare, getting children ready for school, the lunches, all that paraphernalia, the responsibilities of a career or job, whatever you wish to call it, We've come so far with Me Too, but it seems like this financial conversation is the last sort of barrier that's sitting there, where there definitely is this problem going on.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, for me, one of the reasons I didn't get involved, despite one of the reasons was I thought he was better with the money than I was. That he knows what he's doing. I totally trust him. I'm gonna let him do it. Never
Yeah.
mind the checks and balances, right? Very dangerous. The other part of it was I was leading a busy life.
Mm,
I don't have time or the energy. I was raising 2 kids. I'm gonna farm
mm,
it out to my significant other or just avoid
yeah,
it if he doesn't handle it.
mm, mm,
And so there's that aspect of just being busy with your day-to-day life and carving up the responsibilities. But even if you carve up the responsibilities, I'm imploring everybody to still be involved, knowing how much life insurance he has, know how much debt your family has, the household
mm,
has, know who the beneficiaries are, know who the
mm,
passwords are, or what the passwords are on all your accounts. Know if he has disability insurance and know how much life insurance coverage you have. And then there's the other aspect of why don't we get involved? It's just being overwhelmed, by the sheer amount of
mm,
information. Where
mm,
do I start? I mean, you
yeah,
Google any one of these topics,
mm,
it's overwhelming. And
mm,
because so much information comes. And there's also the cultural aspect of this. And I do believe that this is a part of it too, that girls are raised differently than boys, that boys are often encouraged to get involved in the money stuff in the family much
mm,
earlier than
mm,
girls.
okay,
And oftentimes that can lead to girls avoiding, that can lead to women who could avoid money issues. That avoidance can lead to kind of a fear or a challenge, make it seem like a fear, or you're challenged
mm,
to handle money things. And so there's a lack of information, there's a lack of interest that comes from that. And that can lead to a lack of confidence in being able to handle all of those financial things because you hadn't been involved in the first place. So I think a lot of it is just being actively involved. And oftentimes girls are shut out.
mm. And you talk also of a system that needs to change. Are we talking about, is it all aspects? Is it women themselves, the system, the language, or is it that there's a lack in the education system at the start? I mean, it's a lot, isn't it?
I think it's everything you said. I think it's the socialization of girls versus boys. I think we're not taught financial literacy in school. I mean, digging into it, not just here's how to do your checkbook. Meantime, no one really has a checkbook anymore except to just write a
Mm,
check here and there. It's not made to be relevant. I think it needs in school, we need to incorporate financial literacy, not just for a quick couple months. It needs to be ingrained into
mm,
the structure of the curriculum, in my opinion. And of course, I would say in high school, especially when kids are more mature and can really grasp these concepts. And I mean, around the globe, I mean, obviously there are laws shutting women out,
mm,
which is a whole other a whole other issue.
mm. I was just going to ask, how can financial institutions specifically do better? If you had a wish list, what would you be, if you were sitting across now from someone, what would you be asking them for?
I would say look at your budgets. There's got to be something in your
Mm,
budget that you can carve off to
mm,
further women's involvement in financial literacy, and whether
mm,
that's programs, whether that's um, lobbying governments, whether
mm,
that's getting speakers on the subject, to
mm,
bring into high schools, fund these things.
mm.
I would beg to say that there is bandwidth in bank budgets
Do you think
to.
they think they've got a problem, Alison?
I think they do. I
Yeah,
definitely do.
yeah.
I mean, I definitely see lots of firms and banks offering. I mean, there's one thing where they say it and they offer information online, and then some go as far as offering webinars. But
Okay.
sometimes it kind of stops there. It doesn't like it
Mm,
does. I don't feel like there's a real follow through, and I think that
mm,
there's a lot of talk and not as much action, because action means putting money to the issue. And I
mm,
really question whether banks are willing to make that commitment, unfortunately.
mm. And I don't know about sort of talking about different countries and that. I don't know if that comes into it, but I'm thinking about the stories we tell ourselves about money and the way that so many of us are reluctant to talk about money. Is it a cultural thing, or the stories we tell ourselves, or like you were saying, do we reinforce the male model more with that conversation? What are the stories we tell ourselves about money?
Oh, that's a huge part of it as well. I mean, it's the cultural conditioning that we almost tell ourselves, and that leads to that lack of confidence when it comes to managing
Mm,
finances, making investment decisions, or negotiating salaries. I mean, take even negotiating salaries.
mm.
Women tell themselves, "Oh, I'm not a good negotiator." The irony is, innately, we actually are better negotiators because we're more empathetic than men, and so we can read the room oftentimes better than men. There's a stat showing that we're making progress here, that 70% of women are negotiating their salaries now. That's great because, you know,
Mm.
back in the old days, that wasn't happening from my research, I noticed. But the problem with that is that 30% of women aren't negotiating their salaries, and every woman should be negotiating her salary, because guess what? Every man is doing that. And so every woman should always be negotiating her salary, and including those promotional salaries as well.
Well,
And
what do you mean
and
exactly,
we are
Alison, when you're saying
better
they're
at it than you
not
think.
negotiating? What do you mean
Pardon me?
exactly when you're saying what do you mean exactly when you say they're not negotiating? They're
They're
in,
just
are we
taking the
talking about,
salary.
I see.
Yeah,
Just being
I was gonna
told.
say they're just taking the salary. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, they're just being told, you're getting a such and such pay rise, and just walking out the room, or that, yes, it's just that. It's just the static sort of
Yeah,
environment.
it's just well, if you don't feel confident negotiating, you're gonna just take it and say, "Thank you for this opportunity. I really
Okay.
appreciate it," and show gratitude and walk out. Or say, "Hey, could I get a little more?" "Oh, we don't have it in the budget." "Okay." Not saying that that's exactly how it goes, but oftentimes that I know in my situation in the past, that's how I was, before I
Mm,
had representation. "Oh, thank you so much. I'm so grateful to work here." Men aren't doing that.
mm.
Ask any man. I guarantee they're gonna say, "Oh, no, I negotiate." I mean, one example that comes to mind, Barbara Corcoran. She tells an incredible story, about, the 30 years that after she founded the Corcoran Group, which is a real estate brokerage firm here in New York City. And she said not one female manager or support staffer ever asked her for a raise. Not one. And 90% of those staffers and managers were women. So
Okay.
right there, I mean, just that's just one experience, but it
Mm.
really shines a light on the fact that women aren't asking enough. And here's the problem is that, women are stuck in this gender pay gap. We make less than men, um, on average, and we have to make every dollar count. So therefore, we have to negotiate for a higher salary because we have to make our dollars stretch further.
So you tell some great stories in the book, but we've identified a lot of the problems that are out there in the world of finance, I think, in general, and more specifically in the way that women manage their money. But if somebody's listening today and they are saying, right now, I want to feel more in control of my money, where do you advise to start?
Okay, I know this is going to sound boring, but I actually make it fun in the book. Budgeting really does start the control that you're looking for. If you can budget your money, you're going to find more control in your money situation. And this first step when you're budgeting, and what's budgeting is excuse me, you know how much money is coming in, and you know how much money is going out and where it's going out to. And so you have to be honest with yourself. Are you really buying that coffee for $7 every single day you work? Have you added that up 5 days a week? Does that equal a small car payment? Um, so, you have to be honest about where you're spending your money. You want to come up with your average monthly income. and your fixed expenses, and what are those? That's your rent and your mortgage and your monthly premiums and your gym payment. What are your variable expenses? Your groceries, your gas, your gasoline, your utilities. What are your non-monthly expenses? This is part of your budget. What are those? Car maintenance, repairs, and gifts. And these are things you can actually pay yourself for way in advance. So when you are hit with car maintenance or gifts that you have to buy, you've got the money already there. And there are ways to do this even if you're not salaried, if you're a freelancer or a gig economy um, person, meaning you don't have constant work. And so there's a way to figure out a budget if you've got an irregular or inconsistent income as well, by finding your lowest monthly estimate of what you bring in. And how do you do that? You look over the past year and you find where you're working now, because with freelancing, those jobs can change. Use the last 6 months, total up the last 6 months, and pick out, or look at the last 6 months and pick out 3 months where you brought in the least amount of income. You're going to tally up those 3 months of of the least amount of income and divide by 3 for the average. So the idea of doing that is you're underestimating how much you're bringing in, so you're able to live below your means and meet your expenses. And so yeah, so I go through a lot of, I've had a budget, and I also go through a lot of kinds of budgets, but ultimately you have to pick a budget that you can maintain and that's sustainable for you. And so I kind of walk you through some fun ways to do that.
That's really great, Alison. I love that. And that's, as you say, it's very basic. That's core advice, starting at the ground. And I'd say there's a good few couples that, if you're a woman who isn't involved in budgeting, it might be a bit of an eye opener, mightn't it, to go through a budget together and to see exactly where the finances are going.
Yeah, I know, and I suggest actually doing it by hand. And there are a lot of apps out there that do it for you, but I honestly don't think it makes the impact it does if you're actually going through everything. And most people
Okay.
have online banking, and you can see where all your money's going and write it down. It's a real aha moment.
So everybody do that when you finish listening here. We'll encourage everyone to just do that. Even if you do it, go and maybe you need to draw up a new one. Maybe you haven't reconsidered it for a while.
But
And also,
I was gonna just say, what's great about doing it by hand is that you can see where you can save the money. Is you're like, is you once again the coffee, you can say, oh my gosh, do I really need to buy coffee 5 days a week? Maybe I can, maybe I can tamp it down to once or twice a week.
that's great. And what about myths and mistakes that people are making with money?
Um, I think checking your credit score. I think people are worried to check it. I think it's important to know your credit score for
Okay.
various reasons. Whether you want to have a good credit score, if you ever want to take out a loan, if you want to borrow to you know look for a mortgage, buy a car, etc. I think the one biggest myth I think is that checking your credit score hurts your credit score. So checking your credit score does not damage your credit score. That is fact. Another not myth, but sort of a hot tip I would say is that compound interest, so meaning investing, it really is the seventh wonder, plus diversification, because over time you're earning interest on ever larger account balances.
Mhm.
Also, boring is the way to invest. I mean, we can turn on all the business channels and see all the action going on of the trade and see the numbers moving and go online and see it. But boring really is the way to invest. I'm not a day trader. I don't play one on TV. And I've found that boring is the way to invest. Let's say, for example, an index fund that offers you diversification in one fell swoop and that gives you a dividend and with a low cost ratio. So that's the way to go. Index funds are boring, but consistent investing with boring investments, often with dividends, is the way to go.
Well, I love that you've sort of segued into that, Alison, because our newest course on the 42 Courses platform is The Art of Behavioral Investing with Greg Davis from Oxford Risk. And so that's really sort of segued well into just talking about the whole aspect of sort of overcoming our human behavior, as it were. As you said, we were talking about boring investing, and that is an issue with investing, isn't it? Recognizing that we need to sort of overcome our own biases, our needs for sort of excitement, and sticking with the steady eddy. It really is the way to go.
Oh, it really is. I think it's maybe different if you're in that kind of business, you're probably more of a risk taker. But I've found through my research that you don't have to be a risk taker to start your retirement fund and really get it
Mhm,
moving. But honestly, consistency is key. You can't just
mhm,
throw the money in and, invest it, like, even let's say in an index fund. You can't just throw it in once and say, "Well, I'm all done. That's it." You have to consistently invest. And that's what part of budgeting is about. It all goes back to
mhm,
budgeting. My suggestion, at least take 15% of your income and put it towards long-term retirement. And and that's something, it hurts. It's not fun to do, but you're going to pay for it in the end when you get older if you don't start early. And that's really the trick, is starting early, investing consistently with boring investments that once again offer dividends, low cost ratio. Yeah.
So, when we opened the conversation, there were certainly some very sad tales of people in terms of their financial experiences. But were there stories, or are there signs that you've seen that give you hope in this particular area?
Listen, some of the celebrities I interviewed offered hope. I mean, they're sitting pretty right now, yes. But you know what? I think everybody has a money story, and
Mm,
I wanted to interview some. Jessica Alba, she's Jessica Alba, the actress, and she was the founder of the Honest Company. She talked about imposter syndrome and something that we can all relate to. And she talked about how that made her feel tremendously vulnerable and exposed. And she gives tips on how to break it. Some of them include she focuses on the light or the goal to give her the push she needs to move forward. And she believes in the fake it till you make it mentality and focusing on the ideal outcome, and that you actually have to start behaving as if it's already
mm,
happening.
mm,
Um,
mm,
and Sheryl Sandberg talked about the importance. I interviewed her as well. The importance of taking the reins of your finances, and she says until women are financially strong and independent, we are dependent. And just like we won't accept dependence in other ways, we shouldn't accept it with our finances. I also interviewed Deepika Mutiala, who's the founder of Live Tinted, a cosmetic company, and she talked about how money has always been kind of a source of tension in her family, and she's learned how to kind of work through that. And we can all relate to that, right? I mean, money can often become the source of a lot of tension.
mm. As you say, there's some super stories in the book. Were there any points at which there was sort of, as you were working on the book, that you had a moment of clarity, or sometimes you're in the middle of a project and suddenly there's a certain thing you're like, oh god, yes, that's really meaningful to me in particular.
Um, I think that what was the most surprising? I think actually the negotiating chapter was the most surprising. I
Okay.
was surprised to see that women innately can be better or as good negotiators
Mm,
as men, and to understand the why behind that, meaning we have intrinsically the characteristics to be better negotiators, or as good or better, was a shock to me. And that alone should give the reader confidence that when you're walking into the boss's office to have a discussion about your promotion, that you should feel confident in asking for more money. And if they're not going to give you more money, there are other ways to balance that out, to get other things, to get perks, to get stipends and things like that. That there are other ways to explore just getting more for the work that you're doing.
I think that's a very empowering message to maybe leave this conversation with, and for everybody to take away with them. I would like to tell everybody that the book is available in UK and Ireland on the Harriman House website, and on Amazon. And in the US, Alison, where should people go to look for your book?
You can go to Barnes and Noble, you can go to Target, really any bookstore near you. You can get the book. And I
That's
appreciate
really
it.
super.
And most importantly, I hope it helps. That's why I wrote it. I really want to help women become more involved and feel more confident about being involved in her finances.
That's really super, Alison. It's been so lovely talking with you. I hope that it's inspired all women listening to go away from this conversation. And even if you are involved in the finances, maybe to reassess your situation and give yourself a little bit of an update. I do hope that you will be inspired to look up Alison's book, and even if it's just to look up to find out more about Alison herself and the work she does. Thank you so much, Alison, for joining us. I've really enjoyed the conversation we've had today.
Oh, thanks for having me. I enjoyed it as well.
Thanks very much, and thanks everybody for listening. Bye now.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this 42 Courses podcast. If you did, please like and share. Any comments are also very, very welcome. And of course, if you want to learn more about us, visit our website at 42courses.com. Thanks again.